Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. A real pleasure for me to welcome back to our radio show, Tye Farrow, who is a senior partner with Farrell Partners Architects. And we had a great show about a month ago on some fantastic ideas he had for the Bloor Viaduct and how he was going to change that from being an expressway into being just one of the best amenities Toronto could dream of having. I got really positive response to that. So people are interested, Tye, in your ideas and what you want to do. And Tye came back and said, you know what, I've got a really interesting idea that I presented to people on how to save Venice. And he shared with me some description of it. And I thought that everyone would want to know how we can save Venice. So Tye Farrow, welcome back to our show. How are you, sir?
Nice to see you again, as always, and looking forward to the chat. We had a great time last time.
We did. So tell me, how did you get involved in thinking about solving Venice?
So I was going back and forth to Venice pre-COVID. I was there a week, a month. And so in the daytime, I would be in meetings and other things. And then in the nighttime, I would walk home. And when I was there, the first time I was there was right when they had the second largest flood in the last 40 years. And to be in a city, to have water up to just below your waist, and to see the stores trying to operate was one piece of the puzzle that got me thinking about the city. But the other piece was walking home at night in the fall. All the shops are busy, but the stores or the residents above, all the windows are off. And what I found out was that a city that was vibrant and had, 175,000 people living there in the 60s, right now only has about 55,000 people living in the city. And every day there is 55,000 people or more coming on day trips as tourists to the city, which has got the economy, because it's turned into a real mono economy. So what the realization was that Venice is in a very precarious state. One is it's the two floods. It's the flood of water, that a third of Venice, the ground floors are unusable as we speak. And within 20 years, about half of the island will be underwater and crumbling. And at the present time, the vibrant economy that made Venice extraordinary is just washing away due to mass tourism. So it got us working with some NGOs there, a university, another architectural firm, to reimagine a different future for Venice that, not particularly different than our bridge discussion, was to look at how can we solve something, and often with infrastructure, like a bridge, which is only about cars going across. In Venice, how can we solve the flooding, but make it multi-use so that it deals with the economic health, the cultural health, the civic health, the physical health, as well as the ecological health?
Well, I think it's a fantastic idea because and vision, because I've been to Venice, as lots of people have been, and loved the city and found it spectacular. But it is scary that the flooding could take it away. And twice when I was there, nothing like you experienced. But high tide in Plaza San Marco, I got wet, and there's just no question that that water level is above the ground level of those places.
Well, and what's happened is there's sort of the perfect two storms that are coming. One is that with rising sea levels, the water is up about 2 to 3 feet. But equally, what happened is all around the ring of the basin in the 1960s and 70s, a bunch of industry went in. They drilled down to bring up groundwater to cool or feed the industry. But what happens is, you can imagine under the water, the bottom of the basin, there is soil, but underneath that, there is a layer of water. By sucking out the water in that under area, what happened is the entire basin is beginning to drop by another couple feet. And so you've got the problem of the rising sea level, but you see the bottom of the bed is dropping also. And when Venice was designed, very clever engineering because it was all built up on wood piles, as you know. Then they built a stone base that was absolutely right in the middle level of where the waves and the tides would go up and down. And that stone was impervious to salt water, but up above that is brick. Well, now that stone is down below the water level, and the water now, and certainly with the splashing of the cruise ship, is up in the bricks. The water goes into the bricks, it dries out, the salt crystallizes, and it explodes the brick. And so you're at a position where all of Venice is going to crumble and fall into the sea within the next 20-year period. Extraordinary for one of the great cities of the world.
All of Venice is going to crumble and fall into the sea. Unbelievable. We're chatting with Tye Farrow tonight about some solutions he's got for the city of Venice. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Tye in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Tye Farrow. He is a senior architect principal with Farrow Architects. He has an incredible background, which I'll review in a little bit, but he's been an architect working around the world with a bunch of different innovative ideas. He was on my show about a month ago talking about an innovative idea he had for the Bloor Viaduct and how to turn it from an expressway into a beautiful, almost pavilion-like street with gardens and cafes and restaurants and retail and parks, etc. And he's been telling us a story about how Venice is going to disintegrate and crumble into the sea in the next 2 decades, but he's got the solution to solve it. So Tye, how are you going to solve it?
So Venice has continued to grow and evolve. I mean, since which I'll show you in a minute, but from the 1100s, people escaped into the tidal flats in the Laguna of Venice. And they did that because some German troops were coming down and pillaging. And so because the Laguna is very hard to navigate, because some areas are only maybe a meter deep, before you hit the soil, is they went out and they built all of these little islands. And so it was very defensive and protective. And as you know, Venice has then become a world UNESCO site, extraordinary from the Renaissance, culture, music, the arts, Vivaldi. But what happened in around the 1950s is there is no change that's happened to the city itself. And so the question is, what are we going to do to protect the island from water rising sea levels, but also to change the scenario of the future of Venice, which is now a mono economy? And so the idea is allow.
Let me interrupt for a second. What's a mono economy?
A mono economy is really, it's dominated by one thing. So if you thought of a city that maybe just had a car plant, for example, think of Detroit. Once the car plants leave, there is no other business or nothing else to keep the place going. And we know what happened to Detroit. Detroit was deemed a failed city because it had a 70% loss of population. Interestingly, if you look at the city of Venice right now, from the 1960s to today, it has lost over 70% of the population. And that's neighborhoods, that's businesses, that's good jobs, because it is dominated by the second flood, which is mass tourism.
But the tourism has been great for Venice. It's created tons of jobs. It brings lots of people.
It hasn't actually created a lot of diverse jobs. In fact, Venice is packed with a lot of brilliant universities, but like the University of Toronto that has tons of people that come here from all over, they come, they study, and a lot of them then stay, get married, start a business and a job. That's not happening in Venice. Venice isn't producing anything anymore, which it certainly did in the past. It is just about, if you want to work in a restaurant, if you want to work in a trinket shop, a lot of them selling the same thing, that's what the possibilities are. But there isn't the richness, the diversity that happened. a lot of the neighborhoods that used to have a butcher, a baker, a hardware store, now they're shops, a lot of them that are foreign owned, that are selling masks and other things, which you probably saw when you were there, and they're not produced in Venice. And so what's happened is that a city that was vibrant now is a shell of itself. And so what the proposal is how do we change the economy? How do we change the job and the job opportunities and reinforce the community while solving the water? And so what it involves is to continue the tradition of growth and island building that has happened for hundreds and hundreds of years by creating a continuous 32-kilometer archipelago necklace of new and existing islands. So it's sort of a necklace that wraps around Venice that is porous, that allows it to begin to deal with the flooding, but also the mass tourism. These huge cruise ships that come, they land, they dump a ton of people, they go in and they wander around a very limited area of Venice. They don't buy things or spend a lot of time or a lot of money. They come for the day, they dump their garbage, and then they leave. And so it's artificial. But what happened, an extraordinary story for me about 18 years or so ago, is the Italian government said, okay, we have to put something in place called the Moses storm barrier. It's a storm surge barrier. And so what happens is that in the entrances to the laguna from the Adriatic, there's 3 passages that come into the laguna, the bay, of which Venice is in the middle. And below the ground, there are these barriers that come out of the water, and they create a physical barrier for a period of time. And so when there is a storm, which stirs up the wind and makes the sea about 1 meter higher, for example, at different times, this barrier comes up and it stops that surge of water. And then when that subsides, it goes back down again. And so they have spent about $8 billion. It has taken just shy of 20 years to put this in place, and they've only used it once. The problem with the infrastructure is that it is single use. It only works for storm surges, but it doesn't do anything for the water levels that are now about 1 meter high and up in that brick level. So if you look at Venice, it has been a place since the 1100s that was a couple small islands, and it has grown and evolved into a collection of just shy of 120 islands that have evolved over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. But in the 1900s, it stopped. And I wonder if part of that was about it becoming a World UNESCO site, which is all a good thing, but suddenly everybody wanted to go there and they didn't want to have any change to it. But if you look at Venice today, it is a shadow of what it was in the 1960s. In the 1960s, it was one of the most populated times in its history. It had 175,000 people living in a whole range of different neighborhoods. And if you look at the neighborhoods that we like to be in, there's no cars, it's walkable, there's squares and plazas and all the rest of that. When I was in Venice, it was extraordinary. I was there for a week and I didn't hear the sound of a car, not a rumble at all. It was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, no, I wandered around that series of islands on the lower end of your map, and it was beautiful neighborhoods and not that tourist oriented. It was like a beautiful neighborhood.
There's a handful that are absolutely fantastic. They're off the beaten track.
Yeah.
They have their own little campo, and around the campo, a square, are restaurants and, a whole mix of different things, but people live. That's where they live their life. But if you look at the city now, there's 55,000 people. So if you look from 175,000 to 55, 70% of the population is gone. Where have they gone? To the mainland. Why have they done that? Because they can rent out their apartments on Airbnb and make more money, but it just begins to gut the city. If you overlay that, though, if there's 55,000 people living there permanently every day of their lives, there's the exact same number of people that are coming on cruise ships or everything every single day of the year. So think of the neighborhood that you live in that would have that flood of people coming in. And again, the majority aren't staying there or buying or spending time, or they're just moving through it. So it's quite destructive to the fabric of the economy, because all of those businesses and other things begin to wash away. Then you throw COVID on it. And my last visit there was in February 2020. And suddenly the whole city was empty. And my friends or colleagues that were living there, as I think you probably saw in press, it suddenly, you know, the water was clear. People were coming back to life, coming back to it. But as I mentioned, right now, a third of the city, the ground floors, are unusable because of water damage. And if you imagine, if you have a house and it's continually water damage, you can't get a loan from the bank. And so we looked at these maps that trace and look at the flooding that will occur in Venice. And so if you increase the temperature of the atmosphere for 1 degree, the map begins to illustrate that approximately half of all of Venice is fully underwater. If you go up to 1.5 degrees, which all you hear in all the news and we'll hear in Glasgow on the World Conference, if you get up to 1.5 degrees, there's only about a third of Venice that is left above water. Anything that goes above that, Venice is finished, and it will be, a water city. There's nothing left to it, and so that Moses storm barrier doesn't work because it only deals with the storm surges. So as I mentioned earlier, the way Venice was built is amazing because it had these wood piles in the ground. Then they built up through the dirt, but there was an area that was about 1.5 meters in size that was made from stone from Croatia. And that stone is impervious. It doesn't let water in, and it's all solid water. But above, what happened is that there was a little lip of stone that pushed out that stopped the water from splashing up onto the brick. And so what's happened is that there was an area of the stone that for hundreds and hundreds of years, the water level just splashed up and down within that stone area. The problem is right now the water level is above the stone area and into the brick. And certainly when the cruise ships go by, what they do is they splash the water, with the waves higher and higher up into the brick. The water absorbs into the brick because it's porous. It dries out, and salt crystallizes. And when it crystallizes, the pressure explodes the brick. And suddenly now the buildings begin to crumble. And you just can't, a storm surge barrier or anything else, you're finished. Like Venice will crumble into the sea. So what our proposal does is puts a necklace. So if you think of a necklace, that wraps around your neck that has a number of jewels on it. Some of those jewels are the existing islands, but others are new islands that we create, continuing the tradition of building, dredging and building that has always happened in Venice. So there's 4 primary elements around our plan. One is creating this necklace of new islands that connect to the existing islands. So just continuing the tradition that has happened forever and ever. What that does is creates a cruise ship barrier, which the Venetians are pushing for, as well as it allows us to lower the water in between. What's an example of that? Think of Amsterdam. So it's really not a new idea. But between the new and the existing islands, what we've done, like Amsterdam, is we've put a number of locks. So all of the small boats, as well as some of the flow of water, like Amsterdam, can continue to come back and forth because Venice is part of the laguna and it needs to continue. So the big ships are out, the water level's down, but you can still pass back and forth on the ships that are a reasonable size. This is no different than is being conceived in New York right now and being built. And in New York, they're calling it the Dry Line. And it's a number of hills and a park that wraps around really the southern portion of New York City. So again, it's something that's happening around the world. The second idea is, what are these islands made up of? Well, they're made up of a decentral park. So it's not a central park like New York City. It's a park that wraps around a very, very dense city. And what we've put in that, it's sort of like a countryside that the Venetians can escape. And they can go there and hike on sort of rocky hills, sandy shores, boardwalks. They can swim. There's allotment gardens, so they can go out and do their own farming. And so there's a whole range of activities that the Venetians can do. And also the idea being that Venice could hold the fourth great marathon in Europe after London, Paris, Berlin, and Rome. And so instead of going to Venice to sort of tour the old buildings, you could come and do the great marathon run and then come back and spend some time looking at culture. The third idea is,
and this marathon would be around this necklace?
Absolutely. So you'd start in St. Marco's Square, you'd run out of through the old city, and then you'd go around these islands around the water, and then you'd come back and you'd finish in St. Mark's Square. But the idea that studded throughout the parks are a number of pavilions. And what are in the pavilions? There are agri-tech food production. So Italy has a great tradition of agri-tech, high-tech food production, and that's in hydroponics. It's in glass house for tomatoes and vegetables, apiculture, which is honey production, as well as aquaculture. And this is the same as if you think of the great 1851 World's Fair in Hyde Park and the Great Crystal Palace, which was a showcase of the time of all the great inventions, steam engines and all the rest of it. The idea is these pavilions will showcase food production. Why is that important? Because Venice can then begin to produce and feed itself and have food security, but also export it. Why else this is important? Because then the universities would then have programs around this. And so you would go to Venice, you would study high-tech agriculture, create jobs, create prosperity, and people would go there to begin to work. And so these would showcase a whole variety of things. But the next overlay is the quadrants of the park. The themes of the park have a theme that relate to, and the pavilion designs, to the four seasons of the year. And those are also overlaid specifically to Vivaldi, the great composer, the Venetian composer, violinist also. And the Four Seasons Concerto that we know, the fantastic music. So the themes of the quadrants, the North Quadrant would tie back to the mood of his music, same the East, the South, and the West. And so what would they look like? What would they begin
before you go on to the four quadrants, let's take a quick break for some messages and come back more with the four quadrants in just a minute. Does that make sense?
Terrific.
So we're going to come back with Tye Farrow in just a minute to talk about these four different quadrants around his solution for the rising sea level, the lowering land level in Venice that's going to have Venice submerge into the sea within the next 2 decades. Tye Farrow of Farrow Architects. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Tye Farrow. Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Tye Farrow. Tye is a senior architect with Farrell Architects. He's got an unbelievably interesting background, and he's got a fascinating proposal for Venice. Let me tell you a little bit about this guy's background. He's a partner with Farrell Partners Architects. He's got a Master of Architecture in Urban Design with Harvard University. He's got a Bachelor of Architecture with the University of Toronto. And then he's got a Master of Neuroscience applied to architectural design from the University of Venice. And, oh, no, it's not Venice. It's Venezia. I apologize. So you've got really quite an incredible background, and we're going to have you back sometime to talk about the impact of design on neuroscience, because I understand you've actually written a book on that. Is that the case?
We've got a book that's in the works. We're about halfway through it, and the basis of it is why tying together neuroscience and architecture. There's really one reason is how can you create environments where people thrive? And that's where you work. That's where you heal, where you learn, where you play. And space isn't neutral. Space either creates the conditions that cause health, which is economic, social, cultural, physical, and mind, or it does the opposite. And so the degree, the master's, I'm the first Canadian architect who has this degree. There's only 2 universities in the world that offer it. And so what it gives us the ability to work with our clients and tune space that creates the conditions where you can do your best thinking, enhances memory, as well as social interaction.
Sounds good to me. We'll come back and do a whole show on that at some point in time. Anyway, back to the solution for Venice. And you were telling us about the 4 quadrants, the 4 seasons of the year.
So it's really like a necklace that is laid over around the neck of Venice itself. And it is a 32-kilometer park of existing and new islands. And those islands have a whole range of different experiences, so that if you're a Venetian, you can hop on your boat, go across and connect into one of the islands, or in fact, connect and walk around the edge to have a whole range of different experiences. And so what we started
and sorry, what are between the islands? Are there dikes between the islands?
They are. So they're locks. So think of Amsterdam. So Amsterdam is very much connected to the water outside, as well as the water that's feeding down through the river system. So it has to interact with the water outside. Plus, it needs access for boats or other things that are coming in and out. Venice is exactly the same. But what Amsterdam does is allows the water within to be lower than obviously the water outside. Venice needs to get the water back to the historic levels. If it doesn't get back, as we talked about, to the foundations of the building that's within the impervious stone, the buildings will crumble. And right now, the water is up above into where the brick is. And as I mentioned, there's a third of all floors existing in Venice at present that are unusable.
Okay, I understand, but how do you create a dike or a lock such that you can lower the water within this 32-kilometer necklace, but still let boats to go back and forth?
Think of, in a local Ontario solution, think of the Trent Canal.
So every boat's got to stop in the lock and go up or down.
They pull in, that's right. They close the lock behind it. The water goes down. They open the front lock and it goes out.
Okay, so you're going to have like hundreds of these locks around the archipelago?
A lot of the locks. And that's the important part also, because this isn't high tech. It's old industry. And part of or technology, and part of the idea is that's employment also. Like the locks in Amsterdam or something, you'll have a lock keeper, the same as you do on the Trent Canal.
Okay, so let me ask you a stupid question. Then why not just build impervious stone walls around the major islands?
Because the flow of boat traffic is very important. So Venice has always been part of the Laguna. And so it needs to, both from an ecological standpoint, as well as from a civic and a social standpoint, that the flow of boat traffic from one side to other, people coming, going, is a really important part
No,
of
I
the
understand,
history
but
and the culture.
just build like a bulkhead, but a bulkhead out of impervious stone just around the major islands. So not through your whole 32 kilometers, just protect the islands.
Well, what we've done is just followed the same tradition, which is of dredging and building islands. And so the Moses flood barrier that I told you about before is a very high-tech thing. The problem with the barrier, as it goes down, it gets all kinds of barnacles on it, and now it jams up. It has problems with its computer system and all the rest. And we said, why don't we just go into the future using things that have done very well in the past, that again create employment, allow it to continue to be connected to the ecology, but also the ways of life on the movement of boat traffic. And
so
other
simplistically, you're building a bunch of dikes and locks around Venice.
Say again?
You're building a bunch of dikes and locks.
Islands that have locks in between them. That's correct.
Awesome. Okay. And the islands are going to be built primarily from dredging from that same lagoon.
Absolutely the same tradition that has happened before. And so if you look at it from a cost standpoint, it's interesting also because they do dredging all the time within the city of Venice. And so what you're doing is taking something that presently exists, but using it to create something else. And so instead of a single use idea, what it's beginning to do is do multi-use. But as I mentioned, the quadrants also have a theme. So the northern theme, which in fact looks towards the Dolomite mountains in the distance, it has a theme of winter, like Vivaldi's music, the Four Seasons concerto. And so it has the ability for you to go hiking on sort of rocky surfaces and grottos. But in the pavilions that I mentioned that are studded through it, those pavilions have hydroponic seed production and microgreen food production. So this is a view, the view of it would be looking at sort of a rocky mountain. And so underneath these sort of mountains would be the seed productions. And so you could walk along the edge of these pavilions and look into where they're actually producing seeds and microgreens that would then be used to be sent to the glass houses on the other side of the island. So it's not only food production, but it's also the tourism or the other things beginning to go and look and enjoy the area. The spring quadrant, as you mentioned, is next to the Madeira Island where the glass production is, but that has a lot of sandy beaches. So instead of being on the rocky hills like the winter, you could walk along the beach edge and where the water is splashing up, like Lido. But it would also have a whole bunch of community allotment gardens for growing wisteria, which is very famous for that region. But the pavilions also would have apiculture, which is producing honey. And so you would leave Venice and you could have an allotment garden where you would come and grow your own flowers. There could also be flower growing for export. The pavilions also would be selling the flowers as well as the honey itself. So think of leaving Venice, hopping on your boat, you live there, and you could go in the evening or the afternoon and tend your own garden. The summer quadrant is very, very different. And so there's a lot of pop-up things that happen. So you could go and with the boardwalks, you could go swimming, like in a lot of places that happen in Europe, Paris, they're doing the same thing. Or you could hop on your boat. There would be a screen for a summer movie or a concert.
Right.
And so you could sit on your boat or you could sit, but also the food production would be for fish and shellfish. And so think of walking along a large, long boardwalk that you could jump off and swim in some areas, or in other areas that you would bring your chair and you'd sit and watch a summer movie, a classic movie, or there would be a band here playing music, and then you'd grab your chair and you'd walk back into Venice. So
that
it's
vision
offering.
of Venice with so few people, though, doesn't resonate with my view of Venice, where the boardwalk and the sidewalks would be packed with people.
Well, and so what this is doing is
Spreads them out a bit.
Is beginning to open up the sphere further.
Yeah.
And then the fall area on the western side of Venice, the idea is that for the public, it would have cooperative vegetable gardens, again, so you could grow your own stuff. It would have markets, but then it would have the glass houses. So if you look at Amsterdam, or if you look at a variety of the countries in Northern Europe, they are the second largest food producer. Holland, for example, second largest food producer in the world. The largest is the United States, but it has one of the smallest land areas. And that's because they have very sophisticated glass houses that use minimal water, no pesticides, but they produce tons of food. And so the idea, these islands would have these very, the same idea of glass houses. And within the glass houses, they would grow tomatoes and peppers and zucchinis, and they would then put them on boats and take them into, which I saw while I was in Venice, that the supermarket is a boat full of produce. And all of the produce is self-produced in Venice as well as exported. So
I bought
suddenly
some
what happens,
produce off of one of those boats. It was really quite a fun affair.
it's amazing. But suddenly now Venice has food security and it's beginning to produce its own thing. But if you went to Venice, you would have some time in, but then you'd walk along the 32 kilometers, or maybe you do part one day, the other, and have a whole range of different experiences. And so the idea, the primary idea is how can, instead of just doing like the Moses flood barrier, how can we just do a single-use infrastructure? And why not think of solving the flooding that could also help solve the economic issues, the housing, create positive jobs, create places where people would go to university, study high-tech, agri-tech, and then stay there to work in these places, start their own businesses up, and grow their families and begin to start moving back to Venice, so that we can begin to look at, a wider mixed-use view of Venice that solves a whole range of issues that makes Venice, again, a rich, vibrant, extraordinary city, as opposed to something that will crumble into the water in our lifetime.
Unbelievably interesting ideas. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. Any idea what the cost of this is going to be versus maybe that $8 billion that they spent on the storm surge barriers that don't work?
We're just getting into preliminary costing on it, and it's the feedback that we've got back from the university, in fact, some people that are in relationship to it, is that it's a unbelievably affordable solution, because they're dredging right now, and you're taking the dredging, putting it back, and you're creating islands in a very simple way with material they already have. And so the idea that what this also begins to do is rebuild and help expand the ecology that's extraordinary of Venice. And we're just beginning to do exactly what's happened by Mother Nature and people for a very, very long period of time.
We're chatting tonight with Tye Farrow of Farrow Architecture about his solution for the sinking of or disintegration of Venice that he thinks is going to happen within our lifetime, where the sea is rising and effectively the land is falling. And we're ending up with a situation that lots of us have probably heard about, if not experienced, where Venice is underwater. At least the main floors of Venice are underwater, and Pasta San Marco is underwater. Stay with us. We're going to come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Fascinating presentation today by Tye Farrow, senior architect with Farrell Architects. He's run that firm for 29 years. He's been an architect. He's got an incredible background, including a neuroscience for design degree, which he says you're only one of 2 architects in Canada that've got such a designation. And
the only architect.
Only architect. I really want to understand far better in the future how architecture can affect neuroscience. It sounds fascinating. Maybe we could elevate just for a second, Tye. You know, this is a fascinating idea. And frankly, the idea that you presented before about the Bloor Viaduct was a fascinating idea. And both of them are really taking infrastructure and building a far better, more interesting, more innovative, more livable city. Why doesn't this happen more often?
You know, I think coming out of COVID, I think we've all begun to realize that the habitats, the human habitats that we live in, we work in, we play in, are very fragile things. And the way these environments begin to enhance the way we feel and how we feel better. And so part of the focus of our practice is how can we activate optimal health? And optimal health, in fact, the way I think of optimal health, it's like a house. And optimal health is the roof that is supported by 4 walls. And so what are the qualities of the walls that hold that up? Well, we know and we hear a lot about the importance of design and its relationship to ecological health. And there's a big focus that we hear a lot about in the press, and that's very, very important. But equally, the second wall that supports optimal health, and that's human health and community health, is really around civic and societal health. And so arguably, Black Lives Matter, that has come forward. You know, in a lot of communities, and a professor of mine from Harvard in the States was talking recently about how, you know, in a whole lot of ways, the design profession, and for a variety of different rules, people were segregated intentionally. And so design has a significant effect on the health of our societies and our communities. The third wall that's really important that supports optimal health, that roof, is physical health. And so if you look in starting in the 1940s with the whole rise of the suburbs, that was the whole beginning of chronic disease, the tsunami of chronic disease that washed across all of our healthcare systems, where now we're spending about 40% of the provincial budget. And about 75% of that relates to chronic diseases. And so design...
So the suburbs created chronic diseases?
Well, they are a good example.
Why? Because we stopped walking?
We didn't move. We were car dominated. The whole idea of food deserts, or in fact, they're really food swamps. There's lots of food, but a lot of it isn't great for a variety of the different communities. And you can trace the rise of chronic disease and the whole dominance of the way we designed and planned a lot of our communities. So that's the third leg, really the third wall. The fourth wall is really about mind health. And that is really about our sense of coherence of the places that we occupy. And so if you're walking down a street that has, you know, that's car dominated, it has a small sidewalk, you know, with no stores or boarded up, you don't feel safe and you don't want to stay there. You know, if it's a place you can walk, there's trees, there's benches, there's cafes, again, that adds to this whole idea. So I think the important thing, I think the theme of our first talk about the Bloor Viaduct and creating it of a place of both plazas and pavilions as well as cars and a connection down to below, is saying that infrastructure shouldn't be just for cars. It could be mixed use. The infrastructure, this idea of the flood barrier that can wrap around Venice, it can be single use and just a wall, as we were discussing, or it could be a park, It could create employment. It could create jobs, as well as it can create places that we as a community want to go and spend time in.
And
so
be
the whole
host for a
idea,
marathon.
and to do a marathon, which again is something that nobody would ever imagine. Why would I go to Venice to do that? But what it does is it begins to add another sphere of how we imagine different places. And Venice is stuck in what's called a problem trance. And a problem trance is when, from psychological terms or brain science, is where you can only imagine sort of variations on the same. So the idea in Venice now, we need better tourists, we need richer tourists to stay longer. What this is opening up really the sphere of imagination, saying, what happens if it was a park?
What does the city of Venice say to this, Tye?
Well, the city of Venice, the Council of Venice lives on the mainland. And so the problem is that it's sort of like the suburbs surrounding a city, a vibrant city that has lots of tourism. That Venice, the island, is the golden goose. There's lots of tourists, they're getting lots of taxation, and they really don't care, frankly, about the economy because, you know, the coast or the mainland has business for the rest of the people, but as long as Venice keeps pulling in money, they don't really care, and it'll sink until the golden goose is dead.
Well, I hope that you get your message through, because this sounds innovative and exciting. And I love this description of ecological health, civic, societal health, physical health, and mind health. That's our show for tonight with Tye Farrow and his solution for the sinking of Venice, or the disintegrating of Venice, that he says is going to happen in our lifetime. But with his solutions, we can stop. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Good night.